The debt crisis in the EU. Tough times for Europe? In the interview, Thomas Mirow, President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
Thomas Mirow, when you were appointed President of the EBRD, you had to face the financial crisis. What was your toughest challenge?
On substance, I would say probably the situation late in 2008 when Central and Eastern Europe seemed to be at the brink because Western European banks were in difficulties, and it seemed for a while that the European Union would design its bailout schemes in a fashion that would prevent those banks to stick to their engagement in Central and Eastern Europe, and that of course would have been very, very detrimental.
So what kind of countermeasures did you take as the EBRD to help the Eastern and Middle European countries?
Well, first of all, we strongly engaged in policy dialogue. One initiative later became known as Vienna Initiative, an initiative to bring together home and host authorities from the banking sector in order to coordinate and to convince the EU authorities that indeed they should design their bailout schemes in a way that help support the engagement of banks in Central and Eastern Europe. And at the same time, we kind of doubled our own investments into the region. We had been at something like 5 billion before the crisis and stepped up to around 9 billion afterwards.
If you look at some of the countries you've helped now, for example Hungary, how is the situation going on there?
I think it's fair to say that the situation in Central and Eastern Europe is very diverse today, and that one rather should not speak about one region, but look at it in terms of the specificities of countries. And you have a country like Poland, for instance, which is doing remarkably well until today. And you have a country like Hungary that, for reasons which have to do with contagion effects, but also for domestic reasons, still is in a very fragile situation.
Now the Eurozone is in the middle of a debt crisis. How does this affect Middle and Eastern European countries?
Well, it does affect them very strongly, because for most of these countries, the Eurozone, Western Europe as a whole, is the major trading partner. So if demand is weak in that respect, they just lose their by far most important customers. And on the other hand, as I mentioned, in most of these countries, Western European banks play an important, sometimes even dominant role. So to the degree that these banks are deleveraging, that they reduce their loan and credit activities, it hurts the economies of those countries.
What about the situation in Greece? It could happen that Greece leaves the Eurozone. What effects are you expecting then?
Very difficult to foresee because there hasn't been any historical parallel for it. My sense is Greece would have a very, very difficult challenge to face, because it would need to repay debts with a much weaker currency, and if it would decide not to repay, then it would mean it would not have any access to international financial markets for quite a while. And for the Eurozone as a whole, it would be risky, because nobody knows to which extent creditors of Europe throughout the world would still trust in the European narrative that Greece is singular and that there isn't any risk that any other country might leave the Eurozone as well.
Now you are continuously talking to bankers, other bankers or investors. How do they judge the situation? Do the Europeans manage this situation well?
Well, I think it's fair to say they all are very nervous. They, of course, see that time and again, wherever there are elections, opposition parties get majorities, so nobody knows exactly to which degree the Europeans will continuously support the austerity path which has been opened. And then, of course, everyone registers that there needs to be a better equilibrium between austerity being necessary, and trying to spur growth, but doing so without just deficit spending programs, but addressing it in more structural terms.
If Greece goes bankrupt or stops paying its debt, do you expect a contagion effect?
In any event, one would need to take great care that these contagion effects would not materialize.
What would you think would happen, or what has to be done so that these contagion effects don't happen?
Well, in terms, for instance, of Central and Eastern Europe, in countries in which Greek banks play an important role, it would be necessary to ring-fence the stability of these banks, particularly with regard to the way they are funding themselves. So certainly institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, we ourselves would join forces in trying to help those countries like Bulgaria or Romania, which then would face such a situation, to do so successfully.
So the EBRD could help in this kind of situation? Yeah?
Well, we have already engaged. We have provided quite important sums for these banks 2 years ago, and we are in close contact and keep close contact with the regulatory instances of these countries in order to not get into any surprise situation.
Now in Europe we have a big debate about austerity programs or programs for more growth. What do you think is the right way?
As I said, we certainly need to look for a better equilibrium, but unfortunately there is no silver bullet. A big infrastructure project might be helpful in one country. In many other countries which currently are suffering, it's certainly not about infrastructure. And if you go into more complex schemes, then normally they don't deliver quickly. So it's much easier to speak about the necessity of growth than to design exactly the way how this should be delivered.
Germany is facing widespread criticism because it favors austerity programs. Do you think there's a kind of communication problem by the German side?
It's always a tricky situation. Germany is perceived as being the biggest country and the most influential one. That's normally not those whom you like particularly well. There might also have been elements of communication which have not been very helpful. All in all, the situation is quite clear. There is too much debt in the public as well as in the private sector. This needs to be addressed. But indeed, if we all get into an ever-shrinking recession, an ever-shrinking economy, then the problems will not be solved neither.
Now, for the EBRD, the number of countries receiving investments by the EBRD has increased. Why was it so important? North Africa, the Middle East, what does the bank want to achieve in these regions?
Well, it's probably fair to say that the Arab Revolution, the Arab Spring, however you would call it, came in economic terms at a tricky moment. When the Iron Curtain fell 20 years ago in Europe, the world economy was in quite a good shape, which obviously it is not now. And we know that events in Tunisia, for instance, or in Egypt have been triggered by the sentiment, especially of a young generation, that they don't have any economic future. So if one wants to help these countries on their path to multi-party systems, to democracy, to market economy, the international community has to deliver, and international community obviously looked at EBRD with its specific experience of transition as being one potential tool to help. And the problems we face there in structural terms, be it a weak sector of small and medium-sized companies, be it an insufficient banking sector, these problems are well known to us, and we would want to help, as we have done in Central Europe during the last 2 decades.
So the bank could assist the democratic process in the Arab countries, for example?
Well, probably not in a direct way. This is foremost a political decision to take. But what we can do is help to foster market economy, which normally is a very important element of building up sustainable democracies.
So still lots to do for the EBRD. Thank you very much.
Thank you.